Mers, priest and vicar of Church of the Ascension, and you're in the Ascension's parish hall right now. This is Java Street, the church is on Kent Street. So I'm going to turn it over to the chair of the Greenpoint Homeless Task Force, which is the community group that's been very involved with this for quite a while, Neil Sheehan. So he'll be facilitating the meeting.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Good evening, folks. Just a little bit of ground rules on what we're going to try to do over the next hour. We're going to give you a little bit of history on the program that's located here. It's had a few other locations in the neighborhood. We're going to give you a little bit of history on how the program operates and how the program is funded. Then I hit most of those. You'll hear a little bit about the government funding. You'll hear a little bit about who provides the services, the role of the church, and what happens and what doesn't happen in the program. And then we're going to open the floor for questions. Not just questions, speeches are okay, but let's keep them to a couple of minutes so that we all get home in a decent hour. All right? Is there anything else somebody wants on the agenda that I may have missed? Or does it, hopefully your concerns fit under those categories? All right. Okay, so let me just give you a little bit of history. Father John mentioned, I'm Neil Sheehan. I live on Noble Street. I run the Vincent de Paul Society in St. Anthony's Parish. I'm involved with the task force for the homeless for the last 4 or 5 years. The program that's operated here, the 9-bed respite program that's operated here, had its beginnings in St. Anthony's Church. It was operating in St. Anthony's Church for about 2 years. And it was in the church hall, 715 Leonard Street, in the basement. It was all volunteer run. It was very ad hoc, and it opened, basically, Father Chuck opened the hall whenever it got below 32 degrees and allowed a group of volunteers to have folks come down and sleep on cardboard boxes. And that program ran, again, during the cold months, not year-round.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
I was just talking to the shop before.
Sure.
They weren't on cardboard boxes, they were in sleeping bags.
Well, some of them are in sleeping bags and some of them, okay,
Right.
there you go.
That sounds like a fool.
I would, actually,
I would say it was whatever we had.
yeah, so a little bit of each.
Okay.
All right. Maybe some of them got the cardboard boxes from the sleeping bags.
Maybe.
It's possible. So the program began there. If you remember, that then began a long struggle in the community about opening a large shelter on McGinnis Boulevard. That conversation was going on for a long, long time. In that process, the community was pretty unified that they didn't want a shelter that was going to be full of citywide people brought into the neighborhood. As that process was going on, the coalition started to grow, not just with church-based folks, but also with local activists, local volunteers, Woodhull Hospital, the EMS people, and healthcare providers, counseling providers, and was lobbying the city and asking our elected officials if something could be done for local folks. Now, a little history. This is not ironclad, but I grew up on Noble Street. I live on Noble Street. In my 20s, a long, long time ago, I lived in 118 Java Street on the top floor. I don't know if somebody here has my apartment. We have a problem with poor people. We have a problem with alcoholism. We have a problem with mental health issues. We have a problem with homelessness in our community. There are pockets of homeless people. Some of them gather by ethnicity and language. Some of them gather by where they can panhandle the most. Some of them gather by our parks. And more recently, as our waterfront has become more active, they've been coming up from the waterfront into the residential areas. So there are a lot of homeless people in the Greenpoint community. You'll find them under the BQE, you'll find them in the McGoldrick Park, you'll find them in McCarran Park, you'll find a group of them that are pretty aggressive on Manhattan and Greenpoint Avenue. Now, a lot of that is tied to alcoholism, but not all of it. The alcoholism frequently leads to EMS services getting tied up. So ambulances are picking these guys up, they bring them to Woodhull, they clean them up, they let them go, particularly those who don't speak English, they let them go because they can't communicate with them. And they go back on the street and it happens over and over again. I know that 11 years ago when I was involved in developing counseling services, the fellow who runs Polonaise was banging his head against the wall trying to figure out what to do with the guys on Greenpoint Avenue. Right? For those of you who've grown up in the neighborhood, you probably know some of them because you probably know some of their families. If you're newer here, some of the folks who are out in the streets are multi-generation folks whose families have basically been locked out of their houses because the rents have escalated tremendously in the community, and they were kind of the borderline families. And they're like around, and they sometimes live in the Greenpoint Hotel down on Manhattan Avenue. They sometimes live in the street. They're around, and some of them are pretty aggressive panhandling. So that's the bigger picture. For some of us who get involved in this, it's about social services and public health. The average homeless person in Greenpoint has 7 to 8 episodes in detox at Woodhull Hospital a year. According to Woodhull Hospital, we spend about $85,000 of public money to pay for those episodes. So the problem has a human component, it has a faith-based component, it has an economic component. So if you're wondering why is Woodhull involved, why would people who run ambulance be involved, that's why they would be involved in the process. So essentially this respite bed project here was the result of a group of local people and local church leaders advocating with elected officials, and the city finally relenting and agreeing to give $100,000 dedicated to be run a local program. At that point in time, St. Anthony's was not available. Father Chuck retired. The new pastors, who are kind of new to the United States, were not comfortable with the whole idea of contracts and government and stuff, and they just were, frankly, they're very nice people, but they were kind of frightened by it. They didn't want to have a government contract, so they were not an option. We then explored with other churches possibilities, and the first place we landed was here. We landed here. We were hopeful to open up here in the late fall, around November, but we ran into a complication. City came in, they looked, they liked the place, but Father John had other plans for the larger building that kind of collided with that process. For those of you who live here, I'm sure you know, but there's floors up here that there used to be some nice church, Sunday school, daycare activities, but they're fallen in disrepair and they haven't been used at all. And Father, I guess, developed plans that would finance. Do you want me to just talk about it, or you want to talk about it?
Piece. The deal was
your building,
essentially in order to ensure the long-term financial viability of the church, in terms of the way, the whole nature of being a church has changed. The viability, we all know this, whether we're Roman Catholic or whatever we are. So we need to ensure that we have long-term financial viability. We're taking the 2 upper floors that are now derelict and falling apart and becoming increasing liability, and we're condoing the building, selling those 2 floors as apartments, and then retaining this 3rd floor as our community space, which is our only community space as it exists, and therefore securing the envelope, getting a cash compensation return, and then ensuring that this church can be here functioning for the long-term future and doesn't go the way of, say, St. Elias down the block, which would be a very real possibility. So it enables us some kind of functioning revenue and a long-term viability and split. I will say one thing in relation to we were going to do it here, but Department of Homeless Services needed a certain time commitment. And we had heard from the lawyers that it was going to, now things were going to hit. The contracts looked like they were going to happen. And as things go with lawyers, you know, we said, well, we can't do, we have a commitment to them. Well, it turns out, once it got back to the lawyers again, they kept going back and forth, and now that process has been delayed. So now, that's why we now have an opportunity to take it back, although it looks like in the summer, we'll probably begin construction.
Right. So